Good afternoon from New York City and welcome. My name is Romina Quesada. I am the coordinator of the Americas Dialogue in Education Policy Initiative at the Institute of Latin American Studies, or ILIS, at Columbia University. On behalf of the Institute, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the second edition of a dialogue called Women Leaders in Latin American Higher Education. This conference is divided into two panels. The first one took place yesterday, and this one, the second and last. The topic and question of today's panel is Latin American higher education, a space for women's participation, equity, and social reaffirmation. Before we get started, I would like to thank the panelists for honoring us with their presence today, as well as their teams in their institutions for making this effort possible. On the side of Columbia University, I would like to thank the Latinx and Latin American Faculty Working Group at Teachers College for their sponsorship and contributions to the event, as well as to Denise Recinos and Marcela Winter for all their help in the organization of this conference. Last, I would like to thank the audience for being here. Thank you so much. As the event moves forward, please feel free to type your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom, and we will retrieve them after the presentations. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to ILIS's YouTube and maybe shared through its different communications channels. Now, without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to the chair and discussant of the panel, Dr. Regina Cortina. Regina Cortina is Professor of Education in the Department of International and Transcultural Studies at Teachers College, Columbia University. From 2018 to 2019, she was president of the Comparative and International Education Society, or CIES, which is the leading scholarly association devoted to the study of education across societies and regions around the globe. Her presidential address, The Passion for What is Possible in Comparative and International Education, was published in the Comparative Education Review in November 2019. Professor Cortina's teaching and publications are advancing the field by focusing on decolonial theories in comparative education. Two of her most recent articles were published in 2019 and 2020 in Compare, a journal of comparative and international education. Professor Cortina's latest book, Indigenous Education Policy, Equity, and Intercultural Understanding in Latin America, appeared in 2017. Professor Cortina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Romina. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this panel on women leaders in Latin American higher education. The purpose of our conversation today is to learn from our panelists about the unique challenges of instituting policies for women advancement in higher education. Each of our panelists, a prominent woman leader, will discuss the challenges they confront as administrators to forward the goal of gender equity through education. Our first panelist today is Silvia Giorguli. She's the president of El Colegio de México in Mexico City. The title of her talk is Advances, Setbacks, and Emergent Challenges for Women's Participation in Higher Education in Mexico. Silvia has been president of El Colegio de México since 2015, previously professor, researcher, and director of the Center for Demographic, Urban, and Environmental Studies in the same institution. She was president of the Mexican Society of Demography. She studied sociology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and a master's degree in El Colegio de México, a doctorate in sociology at Brown University. Her research has focused on international migration from Mexico to the United States, transitions to adulthood in Latin America, and the effects of demographic change. Thank you, Silvia. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Regina. Thank you very much, Romina. Well, first of all, I'm very glad to be here. I thank ILAS and the Latinx and Latin American Faculty working group of Columbia University, and Romina Quesada for all the contact, and Regina. It's always a pleasure to be here to share spaces with you and discuss around education. And also I greet Cláudia, Costin, and María-Noel Vaeza, with whom I share this panel. I think that it's very fortunate to have this dialogue between countries and different perspectives. What I decided to do for this presentation is give a general overview of what has been the change in tertiary education and gender imbalances in Mexico. And then I will close talking about an initiative that the UNAM pushed, that is an observatory on equality, gender equality in tertiary education institutions. I have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm gonna share my screen. And do you have already my screen? No, wait, yeah. Do you see now my screen? Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, so when I got the invitation and it put me to think on what we can talk, I said, well, of course there have been advances, there have been changes in the general gender imbalances in Mexico, and there are challenges, some new and some old challenges. First, I would like to say that, well, of course that in the, let's say, 5 last decades, there has been a change in the educational, labor, and academic context for women in Mexico. Just to put some brief notes, as Regina said, I'm a demographer, so I tend to use a lot of demographic indicators. But if you think of the change in the last five decades of women, when in the 70s, the total fertility rate was close to 7 children per woman. Now it's 2. The majority of women in Mexico concentrate now in working ages, and there's around 5 million women in the age where the enrollment on tertiary education occurs. Well, of course, there has been a growth in life expectancy, although I have to say that it has been stagnant for the last 15 years at least, probably the last 2 decades. There has been an increase in the number of female-headed households, and there has been a drastic change in educational indicators. No, illiteracy rate has fallen totally in Mexico. The years of schooling has tripled, although we are still far away from other developed countries. And the other large change is the change in terms of the participation of women in the labor force. 5 decades ago, less than 20% of the women were working. And today, before COVID, I have to say that that's before COVID, because after COVID, it has fallen a little bit, but before COVID, almost half of the women in Mexico in the working ages were actually in the labor market. So of course that things have changed a lot. But and in general, we can see that there has been a decrease or even a reversal in gender imbalances in education, in the average years of education, and there have been large gains in the labor force participation. And let me show you some data. This is the average year of schooling of men and women, 15 years and older by sex. So you can see that in the 1970s, the difference between the blue and the reddish bar is the gender gap, no? So how the gender gap started decreasing, and by 2016, this graph goes all the way to 2016. It was very small, but this is for the overall population. When we look at the population by cohorts or generations, so we do see that, of course, the older generation, men still have a larger average schooling than women. But in the younger cohorts, it's where we see this reversal in the gender gap in Mexico. And the reversal can be seen especially, again, well, this is the same information, the gap in terms of the population with at least 1 year of tertiary education. For the older generation, it's almost half of the women with tertiary education compared to the percentage for men. And for the younger generation, we see again this reversal of the gender gap in terms of the access to tertiary education. So of course, that's a large change that also has had an impact in terms of the family life and social organization in Mexico. Furthermore, in this, well, I decided to use Japan as a comparison group just to have some reference in some other country. So furthermore, when we talked about women enrolled in tertiary education at bachelor, master, or doctoral programs, what we see in Mexico is half of the students at bachelor and doctoral are women, and in the master's programs, there are more women than men, which is quite interesting if you compare it to Japan, where there's still a lag in terms of the attainment or the participation of women in tertiary education. Now, this is a proportion of women among students enrolled in tertiary education. When we look at in overall percentage of men and women who attend tertiary education, we see a large gap between Mexico, Colombia, and Japan. And here we see again that in Mexico, there's a the reversal of the gender gap, as there are more women who attain tertiary education compared to men. And in Japan, the proportion here, you see what you didn't see in the other graph, you see it here for Japan. Now, what does this mean in terms of the labor participation rate? As I mentioned, there has been a large change in labor participation rates in Mexico. And education is it's an indicator that separates a lot the participation of women in the labor market. Now, this is the participation rate of women with less than higher education, and this of women with higher education. So this is like one of the main factors differentiating among women who goes to the labor market and who doesn't. And it's interesting to know that for men, education does not have this differential impact that we see for women. Now, the other thing to notice from here is that even women with higher education lag behind in terms of participation in the labor market compared to men. So of course there are gains, and of course there are important gains in terms of the participation of women in tertiary education and of women with tertiary education in the labor market. However, there are some issues that of concern. First, even though we have more women in tertiary education, we don't see that in the participation in academic careers as faculty, for example. There's a lower participation of women in the highest categories among the faculty and in the academic planning and management. And there's still a large segmentation of men and women in certain fields. And let me show you again some data. First, in this table, what I have is men and women, Mexican men and women enrolled in bachelor and graduate studies. So again, you do see that for graduate students, the number of women is higher, and of men and women, well, it's very similar, a little bit higher for men. Now, but what is interesting to see from this table, first is the participation of women in social sciences, administration, and law. It's almost half, and the low participation in engineering and manufacturing. And that's even more clear when you look at graduate studies. No, you see again the concentration of the larger participation of women in education at the bachelor level, but especially in graduate studies. This is enrollment. What happens after women graduate and go into work in tertiary education? First, in this table, what I have, Mexico has something that is called the National Research System. That is a system where researchers with a certain productivity get a compensation, an additional compensation over the salary. And candidate is the youngest cohorts, and then 3 would be the more senior professors. So of course that among the senior professors, we would expect to have more men than women. But even among the candidates, their number of women is lower than the number of men, no? Which sort of tells you that still we have a lot to go and understand why, even though women are graduating from tertiary and graduate programs, they are not going into an academic career, at least from this indicator. The other thing has to do with the field of knowledge. So of course, in all the fields of knowledge, men have a larger participation than women. In some, it's almost equivalent, and so such as humanities and medicine, and in some it's clear a very masculine field, such as mathematics, physics, engineering, biotechnology. So again, we see that for men and women who do go into the academic trajectory, there's a large segmentation by field of knowledge. So, and then when you look in terms of, for example, the number of women presidents or in higher positions that take decisions within universities, it's very low. The number of women presidents in Mexico, it's really low compared to other contexts such as Colombia, where I am now, right now visiting. So I think there's a lot to think about. First, which are the factors that are related to this persistence in the gender imbalance in the academic trajectory? And second, what actions or policies can be implemented? So, of course, this is a multidimensional issue, but I think that it's very useful to follow an initiative that UNAM, the National University, had. They installed a national observatory for the gender equality in Mexican universities, and they suggest that we need to look into these 8 dimensions, which are specifically related to certain actions. For example, when they are looking and analyzing what's happening in Mexican universities, they look at the legislation, whether there are norms that rule institutional life with a gender approach, whether there are planning and offices in charge of gender equality within the university, and whether there are resources allocated within the institution for this goal. Another issue has to do with co-responsibility, family co-responsibility. To what extent universities have programs or policies that allow this balance, to solve this balance between family life and academic life. Another has to do with statistics. To what extent the universities are presenting the statistics of the number of students, promotions, acceptance rates by sex. And that's a very important input diagnosed for the definition of policies. An issue that I don't know to what extent in the US it might be a context, but in Spanish-speaking countries it is, the use of language, lenguaje inclusivo, inclusive language, or language with a gender approach, and the making also pushing for a non-sexist or derogatory language regarding gender issues. The continuous existence of education and campaigns against gender violence. Then the importance of having gender studies and research around gender within the university. At el Colegio de México, 2 months ago, we started with the Center on Gender Studies, and we are celebrating that because it's an important change. El Colegio only has 8 study centers, and now one of them is on gender issues. To what extent the universities have specific norms or programs and actions against gender violence within the university with a preventive approach and with attention approach. And finally, to what extent the universities are actually pushing actions that foster equal opportunities for students, for the administrative workers, by the way, most of them women, among the faculty and among the authorities within the university. So these are some of the dimensions. I can, in the questions, if there are, I can talk a little bit more about the experience at el Colegio de México. We have moved forward in some dimensions. We have found more resistance in certain dimensions, but in general, I do think that what happens in the university communities is universities usually are pioneers of social change. So I think that I'm very optimistic in that side. And finally, we have had in the last 18 months, some reflections around what COVID has told us and gender within the universities. No, for example, our faculty, those who are young faculty, women, had more challenges as their care work has increased, especially when they have young kids at home. And in Mexico, school was totally canceled for around 15 months. So they had the children at home. Of course, that there's a large imbalance in terms of the time for care work. So we have to design and implement measures to support faculty with young children, especially women, but also among our female students. And many of El Colegio de México has mainly graduate students. 2/3 of our students are graduate students, many of the female students with children. So we also have to take that into consideration. And we are also worried about other aspects that may not be seen directly right now, but that may have an impact in the medium term related also to COVID. I already mentioned that we have some signs of a decrease in the female labor participation in Mexico in general as a result of COVID, and again, this imbalance in care work. So we need to look what will happen in terms, again, of our faculty and our female students. And to finish, we also think that going and looking at gender within the universities and gender equality within the universities needs to take into account the situation of administrative workers. As I mentioned already, most of them in el Colegio de México, around 3 in every 4 are women, no? And I will finish with this and leave the space. I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Silvia. Ahora voy a presentar, I'm going to present our next panelist, Cláudia Costin. Cláudia is at the Center for Excellence and Innovation in Education at the Getulio Vargas Foundation in Brazil. The title of her presentation today is Equity in Higher Education and the Internationalization of the University. Cláudia Costin is the founder and director of the Center for Excellence and Innovation in Education Practices. She is a visiting professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education and was the senior director for global education in the World Bank. She was Secretary of Education of Rio de Janeiro. More recently, she joined the board of UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. Thank you for being with us, Cláudia.
So thank you very much, Regina, Cortina. Thank you for the invitation that I have received and to be among such brilliant women, María-Noel and Silvia Giorguli. So I will also share my presentation. Just a second. Let me see how proficient I am in sharing. And I will start talking about something that I have, in a sense, helped to develop when I was the senior director for global education in the World Bank, which were the SDGs, especially the SDG 4. In September 2015, 194 countries signed to a sustainable development goal, stating that the countries would ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning, which is a real challenge, not only for women in our countries, but for everyone in the developing world, and in particular to Latin America. So I want to just start talking about 2 or 3 of the targets of the SDG. For example, the SDG 4.1 that established that in 2030, so in 9 years, we would ensure to all girls and boys that all girls and boys complete, not only have access, free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. Our countries in Latin America have had a history of exclusion of boys and girls, but mostly girls. Now, most children in the continent are in primary education, and in many of our countries in secondary as well. The problem that we face right now, and this will affect the universities, is that they are not learning as they should. LATAM has been at the bottom level of the PISA ranking, and we have difficulties for many countries to ensure the appropriate level of preparedness for university. If we go ahead, let me be specific about my own country. So we have a country, my own country, early literacy is not ensured at the end of third grade when the child is from 8 to 9 years old for 55% of the students that are in public schools. This is an assessment organized by the Federal Minister of Education. It's a good quality assessment, and unfortunately, the data is not positive. This last assessment was done in 2016, but it is still very relevant data, especially in a context where we have faced COVID, with schools closed for almost 2 years, especially the public schools, which increases the inequality in education because private schools have been open, but not the public schools. They will open now, most of the public schools in November, just to end the school year and with mandatory schooling. And if we look at the other end of what we call in Brazil basic education, which goes from pre-primary up to the end of what in the US is called high school, we have at the end of high school only 10.8% of the students performing at grade level in math and 35.1% in reading and comprehension, or as we call it in Brazil, in Portuguese. If I look, on the other hand, to the PISA data, Brazil participates, as many other countries in Latin America, in PISA. Half of the 15 years old did not perform at basic level in reading and comprehension in the last PISA before the pandemic. We will have another one in a few months, but it's very saddening. But the PISA also has informed that the results in our country are stagnated and that we are the second more unequal economy among 79 participants. But the PISA also sends questionnaires for students, 15-year-old students, for teachers and for school leaders. And what the students inserted in their answers is they were asked if they want, what was the profession of their dreams. Only 2.7% of them said that they wanted to become K-12 teachers. The teaching profession in Brazil, but as well in the rest of Latin America, is unattractive. So we end up selecting as teachers the least prepared high schoolers. And I can say this candidly because I started my own career as a teacher, and unfortunately, the profession is very unattractive. Salaries are very low, and contracts are very fragmented. To add to that, pre-service education for teachers do not prepare for the reality of the classroom. Yes, we have had some improvements in my own country in learning. According to the national assessment of that we organize in the country, since 2005, primary education has improved in each edition of this assessment. In the last 5 assessments, 9th grade has improved as well, but at a very slow pace. In addition, we have another we have another bit of good news, because 69% of the teenagers had successfully graduated high school in 2020, compared with only 52% in 2012. So we are making some progress, and this would impact university access where they're not for the COVID and the prolonged school closing. There are also sad data on educational inequalities. Brazil is the 9th more unequal country in the world on social inequalities. And these social inequalities reflect on educational inequalities. We have a very low coverage of early childhood programs among the poorest. So inequalities in education are not mostly related to being a woman, but much more to being from vulnerable settings. I will speak a little bit more on inequalities vis-a-vis women. We have also high repetition and dropout rates among the poorest, and this precedes the pandemic. After the pandemic, we are now facing again child labor. We are facing again hunger, and we are facing again huge dropping out. Traditional teaching, in addition to that, is not capturing students' interest, and disengagement was present in secondary schools before the pandemic, and many young people are not returning to schools. Girls are not returning because they have to take care of their younger siblings, and boys are not returning because they are engaged in child labor. Even sexual exploration of boys and girls is happening here in Brazil. I'm very saddened to say so. And young people in Brazil are not convinced that education would bring them a brighter future. But there is not only the SDG 1, there is the SDG 4.3 that says that by 2030, we would ensure equal access for all women and men to affordable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university. The problem in access to university is not necessarily related to gender, but rather to income levels combined with ethnicity. So, yes, there has been an increase in the African, Brazilian, and indigenous population to university in recent years prior to the pandemic, but not enough, not similar to their size in university. And this increase has been related to a public policy option of ethnic quotas. And even in the case of one of our best university, the University of São Paulo, a public school's former pupils quota, which means that we prioritize public school students in our access to USP, which is a university that is for free. And within this quota, ethnicity quotas as well. They have helped leveling the playing field, but not as much as expected. And as you all know, because our countries are alike in some senses, school closures during the pandemic has interrupted a virtuous cycle in Brazil with insufficient preparation for our huge admission exam, which is called ENEM. It's an exam that provides access to most public universities and part of the private universities. How can you take an exam without feeling prepared for it? When schools were closed, there was no connectivity in most of the homes, or an important part of the homes. And if there was connectivity, there were not equipment, and parents were not working from home as in affluent families. They were in the streets seeking for some income to feed their children. So what challenges does the future bring to Brazil in that sense? There is not only the pandemic, there is something else happening that has been named or called as the future of work. I was a member of the ILO, the International Labor Organization, initiative on the future of work, or the fourth industrial revolution, as we call it also, which means an impressive and rapid automation and robotization that brings with it massive jobs extinction. Osborne and Frey, two researchers from the University of Oxford, say that 2 billion job posts will be extinct by 2030, the date where we would have to achieve the mandate of the SDG 4. And for Brazil, as for other countries, it's important to remember that, yes, other job posts will be created and even whole professions, but they will demand much more sophisticated skills, because the robots or the artificial intelligence is substituting human work, even work that demands cognitive skills. So we will have to teach children and young people, and even in university, the young adults, critical and system thinking, collaborative problem solving, and the 21st century skills such as empathy. If in a context of rapidly fading demographic bonus, as the colleague that preceded me, Silvia Giorguli, has mentioned, the demographic are changing. If we don't do anything in a context of not only a rapidly fading demographic bonus, but also of stagnated productivity in many of the countries in Latin America, we will be forever captured by all kinds of populism that come along with fragile citizenship. In this context, how should the universities react? And here I will speak much more about women. Building a more diverse team of students, but also of professors. We have had an increased access to tertiary education in the region in the last 2 decades. We are not still there. If we look at the data specific from Brazil, only 21% of adults with among 25 years old and 34 have a university degree. But most of the students and professors in higher education in Brazil, but also in Peru, Argentina, and Colombia, come from privileged backgrounds. We don't want to have a situation where poverty is destiny, can be transmitted intergenerationally. Inequalities in education are, as I have already mentioned, prevalent at lower levels of education as well. But it's urgent not only to improve the quality of primary and secondary education, but also organizing an university that can receive kids from less affluent backgrounds and help them to feel properly prepared. And it's also important to ensure a reverse brain drain, bringing back talents that have studied and worked abroad with good working conditions so that they can feel at home and we can add human capital to our countries. It's also important to ensure a stronger connection between teaching and research. In many research universities, we overemphasize research to the detriment of teaching. It's as if we didn't need to prepare young people to their professional options and even to have the ability to reinvent themselves professionally as they face the successive waves of jobs extinction that is prevalent in the fourth industrial revolution. Internationalization is also an important feature in higher education for sharing knowledge, partnering in research, and preparing students to be global citizens. And global citizens doesn't mean only to speak different languages or to have cultural agility. It means also human rights, respect for human rights, respect for women, respect for different ethnicities and cultures. And it's important.
2 minutes.
Yes, okay. It's important also to invest in each country's competitiveness for talents. And this means avoiding loss of talents that is normally linked to lack of opportunities in each country, disrespect for institutions. I'm sorry to say that my own country is disrespecting institutions right now, censure, political persecutions that are starting again in my own country, scientific negationism, denial, scientific denial, and insufficient funding. And with this, I stop to respect the time and I'm open to and eager to see our debate later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cláudia, for a very interesting presentation. So now I want to introduce our last speaker this afternoon. Her name is Vaeza, and she is the Regional Director for the Americas and the Caribbean in UN Women. The title of her presentation is The Importance of Education for Empowering Women and Eradicating Violence. Ms. Vaeza joined UN Women Headquarters from the headquarters of the UN Office for Project Services, which she served as Director for Global Portfolio Services Office and Partnership Practices Group. Ms. Vaeza held multiple positions in Uruguay Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including as political counselor at the Uruguay Embassy in the US, and as a delegate of Uruguay to the UN General Assembly. She holds a doctorate in law and social science from the University of the Republic of Uruguay and a master's degree in International Public Policy from Johns Hopkins University. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. This has been, Regina, a very nice surprise, this invitation. And we are very eager to work much more directly with the academia, as we are trying to do everywhere. But this is fantastic. Thank you so much for the invitation. And for me, it's an honor to be with these fantastic women that have presented, Silvia and the colleague from the World Bank. This is an amazing topic that we, unfortunately, in our strategic plan as young women, we don't have as an objective. We have 4 big objectives. One is political participation, economic empowerment, ending violence, and women, peace, and security. But we believe that education has to be everywhere. It has to be in everything what we do in every level. So let me start with a small presentation. And the angle I gave to the presentation is the future of work. What our colleague just said. We need to think how women are going to insert themselves in the world of work. Because right now, 118 million women in the region work in the informal sector. They lost their jobs and they are recovering their jobs again, precarious and in informal sector. So what are we going to do with this group of women, 118, and also 40% of them don't have access to technology? So we need to think education in a broader perspective. I will address 3 things: the actual situation of women and girls in Latin America, young women experience around the region, and the best practices that we have seen around the region. So the situation right now in our region, there's a vicious cycle, as Regina, as our colleague was saying before. There is a vicious cycle. Girls who do not attend school are more likely to be forced to marry or join a man, are most likely to be violated, and are most likely they're going to be dropping their education. For example, girls in Bolivia and Nicaragua spend between 20 and 80 minutes a day, more than men, in domestic and care work. And we believe there is a crisis of care. And the care is fundamental. It's like the world woke up in the pandemic that there's a need for care, which is absurd, but that's what happened. I think that the world realized that we have to have some solution for care. But what is that solution? We believe is the creation of integrated systems of care. That is an investment from the government that needs to happen because it will provide a triple dividend: a dividend in the kids in the home, a dividend for the women that can go out and work, and a dividend for the new industry of care. As our population is aging, we will need more and more care, and this creates employment. So this is one of what they call the orange economy, you know, that. So we are hoping that millions of works are going to be created with the economy of care. And we also hope that it's going to be works that are more decent, that will have, you know, contracts, and that we have opportunity to grow. In Ecuador and Argentina, women and girls spend almost 3 to 4 hours a day more than boys working from chores in the house. And in Latin America, we have a program, I will talk about that later, sorry. In Latin America and the Caribbean is the second highest adolescent fertility rate in the world. In Peru, 13% of girls are adolescents under the age of 19 are already mothers. And of course, they drop school and they don't come back. And the more poor they are, the more they have to care. And the more they have to care, the less opportunity they have to work. This is a vicious circle that I was referring. That's why we believe that the recovery from the pandemic needs an increase in care work and need an increase in systems of care. We need also psychological, physical, and stop the sexual violence. Because what we saw and what we address all the time as young women is that the pandemic in the shadow has been the violence against women. It's amazing the numbers. In Colombia, we have in 1 year during the pandemic, 3,000 women that have been raped or suffer sexual violence. Every day, 51 girls and adolescents, every day. And this is the same number that repeats everywhere. It's not just Colombia. It's not just Central America. It's in every country of our region. And we don't have a war, but we have numbers that are worse than war zones. On average, we have, I wanted to discuss how we can redress women that are going to university, how we can excite them to become more technological or more scientific. We have, our region is the only one in the world where research parity has been achieved. 45% of the total number of people that are researchers are women. And we have seen in the pandemic many women that have come up with amazing solutions for the COVID. But you know what? Only 10% of these women sit in the table of decision. So they are in the shadow doing the research and they're not being recognized. Because obviously the ones that are holding power are men. So although we have almost parity in research, women are not allowed to really be in the table where decisions are made. My next slide talks about the percentage of women in research, as you can see there. And there is a lot of disparity there. That's why we insist that we have to continue pushing girls and adolescents to study in STEMs. This is what will create, that will conform the future of work and technology and science. And this is what we need. So women can have access to better jobs, can have access to better position in the labor market. So I would like to go now to some figures that are quite compelling. That for us is important to mention. There are 184 million cellular phones less in the hands of women than men. This is worldwide. Only 45% of women are connected to internet. Imagine all the transformative energy that the world is missing because only 0.5% of women, nearly only 0.5% of women have access. And this for me is a staggering figure. Only 2% of women's own business or women's founders of technological companies, the startups, only 2% receive investment capital. They don't see women in the financial work as being able to bring a big proportion of profit. While on the contrary, if you analyze those companies that have received investment capital, they perform 3 times better than the ones that are directed by men. And only 30% of female students study STEMs around the world. So those are the figures that we need to change. And during the pandemic, can you imagine those women that have 3, 4 kids with only one small cellular to have classes and to have access to technology? It was impossible. I would like also to convey the initiatives that we are doing in UN Women to really understand the dynamics of girls and adolescents that become mothers, girls and adolescents that are given in early marriages, because it's happening in Latin America. And Dominican Republic and Mexico are the countries that have more prevalence of early marriages or early unions. And we are the only region in the world that we are not improving those indicators. On the contrary, there are more and more. And we don't have the figures after the pandemic, but I'm sure that it will be worse. So we are pushing this initiative that we call it Second Chance Education and Vocational Learning. And this is a pilot project to look for comprehensive solutions for those who have missed out the education as a result of poverty or sexual assault, of displacement, migration. Don't forget that it's so big in our region. So the project want to develop a context specific, and in Mexico, we have it in several places, to scale up the learning and entrepreneurship capacities to gear towards employment path. And this woman wants to continue education. So it is important that academia can embrace these women that had to drop out due to their personal circumstances. How can they come back after they have a second chance to finish their education? Among the results, we have fewer marginalized women and youth in disadvantage. We are preparing them to be more active, educating themselves, but also to enjoy education while they are doing an entrepreneur. This project, we have it in 6 countries around the world and in 2 in Latin America, Mexico and Chile. The other issue that for us is extremely important is how we bring what academia has been developing in behavioral insight, in behavioral science, how we bring it together to analyze why we have so much violence against women. So again, Mexico has been an amazing laboratory. We have a fantastic representative and a great team. And we developed a campaign that I would like you to see it afterwards, how to contribute to social change through transformation of behaviors and attitudes. And I think that academia has so much to give and so much to help us in the international organizations, in particular UN Women, to make sure that we understand where is academia in this and how we can take advantage of working together. Also for us is critical supporting youth in our region, amplify the voice of the youth, give them special recognition. We have the Generation Equality Forum that took place in Mexico and in Paris. And for us, education was essential. And most of the young leaders, they are in academia, but they suffer as well their frustration. How are they going to come out of the university in the labor market? So there is something that we need to work together, how we can make the youth understand the importance of the new skills needed, whether, as my colleague said, whether it's empathy, team building, consensus building, all those new skills that would be required, that women are much better prepared than men in reality. And some best practices that I would like to share with you is how we are pushing governments to prioritize the needs of girls and adolescents and young women. They're not included in plans and responses of their recovery. And how parents should have equal learning opportunity from their children, their sons, their daughters. And we believe very strongly that co-responsibility in domestic and care work should be in the education system in all the levels. because it's not possible that women has to do 4 times more unpaid care work than men. And of course, violence. Why is it that there's so much violence? How we can provide this behavioral change from the education system as well. My next slide is to mention a quick review of the programs that are being successful around the region. Ad hoc programs such as Mulheres Ciencia in Brazil and Science and Gender in Costa Rica. Some countries are making an effort to reach out to girls and adolescents and encourage them to be researchers, to be in technology, and of course, continue creating networks of these girls, adolescents that are studying in STEM. For us, incorporate gender approach in national innovation and research is critical. This gender perspective in the curriculum, secondary and university is essential. And of course, as I said before, encourage girls and adolescents and adults to study STEM career. And I want to leave you with this thought. We believe that education is a key factor to empower women, but also to eradicate violence against women and girls, and also for a more equal and prosperous world. We believe that we need to work together in an integrated manner, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030. And in that sense, I am very happy that we share the same view. And I hope that we can work together to continue improving to continue making more close academy and practitioners to really benefit for the benefit of the women of the region. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I stay here for questions.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Maria, for that wonderful presentation. Now I have some questions from the chat that I'm going to ask in the same order of the presentation. So, Silvia, I would like to ask you, since you mentioned the Observatorio de Género de la UNAM, I wanted to ask if El Colegio de México has created any way to track gender inequality among faculty and staff in the different research centers?
Should I answer now or should I?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So as you mentioned in my short bio, I started as president in 2015. And we started setting an agenda on gender issues at El Colegio that was inexistent before that, no? And it not has to do only with me, with a woman arriving for the first time after 80 years of existence of El Colegio de México as president, but it also has to do with the times. It was something that could not be avoided, no? So the first thing that we said was to do a diagnosis, because we didn't know. So it's something that we would feel, everybody sort of has a sense and we talk about it, but we needed to have a diagnosis, more specific diagnosis on gender issues within El Colegio, no? And so we started with stats. We look at the difference, for example, El Colegio de México is concentrated in humanities and social sciences. So for example, in terms of number of students, we started looking at differences within each of the programs and looking at some of the statistics. And we did find, for example, that the female faculty is tend less to ask for promotions into the higher categories than men, no? We also found we did focus groups and we did a large survey among the administrative workers and the female students, and we have some issues regarding that we didn't have any protocolo, any document, and any rules or norms regarding acoso sexual, sexual harassment, no? Within, and we started having some cases. We have a specific, something that had not happened before, that the female students organize in what they call now colectivas. So they formed a new colectiva of students, and they make this big campaign that was, that said hashtag in the Colmex. It also happens in Colmex. En el Colmex también pasa. So that sort of moved the whole community. And there was, for example, the unions were very mad because the students were saying that workers, administrative workers and faculty had certain attitudes that were not appropriate. And the unions were very mad because they're like, oh no, but they are not presenting any specific action or demand. And that sort of brought us that one of the main issues we had to work on was on the protocolo para la prevención y atención de los casos de acoso sexual y hostigamiento sexual en el colegio. And that was one of the first issues that we worked on, no? And it concentrated a lot. We also started this campaign of working with the worker union, with faculty and with students to open this space of discussion on issues such as consentimiento, no? To define what is sexual harassment. We did an online course for all the community. Some were very fast in terms of adapting and taking these courses and attending these spaces and workshops that we have. In other areas, there was more resistance, but it's something that we're working on. I think that we have a first dialogue that we did in 2016 and 2017. Probably we need to update it now after 4 years. But the observatory is very important, and with this I finish, because it sort of gives specific indicators suggesting institutions what they need to work on, no? So at first we were like in a very low average. Now we have improved in some, and as I mentioned, for example, creating the Center for Gender Studies was very important in terms of the recognition of gender research at el Colegio de México, etc. So we're moving, and in some indicators we're moving faster, and in others we're still lagging behind.
For your answer is very complete. So I would like now to ask a question to Cláudia. Cláudia, can you tell us a little bit if there are specific programs in Brazil to help dropout girls? How can girls come back to school if they drop out?
Yes, definitely so for boys and girls, but there are some of them specific to girls, addressing girls that were disengaged from school and girls that are that had early marriages, including marriage, formal marriage or informal marriage, let's say. So showing them that they can come back to school, and some support for nursery school and support with their babies will be provided. And also some of them feel guilty or they feel bad at the fact that they got pregnant, especially in slums. There is a culture not only of harassing girls, but also of some girls offering themselves to the not drug dealers, which is very sad because then they feel guilty. So as to get some protection, to not feel so troubled with the risk of being raped. So there are some programs with putting together social protection and education workers to ensure that these girls feel supported, that they can be welcome in school and they will find a protective environment.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad that those programs exist. And I wanted to ask Dr. Vaeza, is just sad to hear, the level of sexual harassment that is taking place in countries in Latin America. And even though this is a campaign of UN Women for a long time, I don't know if really it has any effect. But I wanted to ask you, how are the governments cooperating with UN Women to really do campaigns to help this issue? Because in Mexico, as you know, there has been a tremendous rise in feminine, violence toward women. And so I know that the Mexican government is not very collaborative, but I wanted to know in other countries what is happening, because I think it's a huge social policy that needs to be addressed.
Thank you for that question. We do two things, two big campaigns on a yearly basis. One is the 16 days of activism that starts on the 25th of November, which is the day of ending violence against women, and ends on the 10th of December, which is the day of human rights. And what we do, we orange the world. We light with orange all the main important buildings. In fact, in Mexico, it's El Ángel, or other, the pyramids of Egypt, the Cristo de Corcovado. We orange the world to make sure that those days people understand the need of the change in attitude, the change in behavior. And in those days, we are super active, not just UN Women, all the UN system, to really fight against violence against women. So that's something that happens every year. And I would say that it is successful because it puts the issue on the table during 16 days. And the press and the government, everybody has to respond. And it's very interesting, the embarrassment sometimes of those who are in government, because they cannot say what they said last year. They have to say something new, or they have to, it's a sort of a monitoring also of, how the public policies are being, developed. And the second campaign that we have, and we have it for now a couple of years, is called He for She. And it's a campaign that is directly to men. What can you do for gender equality? And that's a big question. We have more than, millions of men that have enrolled. And the good thing about this campaign that had 4 schemes. One scheme was with the governments. So we have presidents of many countries, I think it was 25, that we are committing of what are they gonna do, for gender equality. For example, my former president, Tabaré Vázquez, was at He for She campaign. He committed to establish the system of care, and he did it. The president of Malawi committed to pass a law to end early marriages, and he did it. So this has been, and amazingly, the Prime Minister of Japan, which is one of the most conservative governments, he committed for more women in ministries, to double the number of ministers in the cabinet, and he did it because there was only one woman, But so we are always, every year we are making sure that they honor their commitment. The second was the private sector, and that was super interesting. For example, we had companies that if they wanted to be a champion, they needed to demonstrate how many women they have in senior management, how many women they have in their boards. At the beginning, McKinsey had only 2 women in their board. And at the end of the exercise, they have 50-50. They committed and they did it. Why was that? Because every year, my executive director saw them in Davos, and there was a public meeting saying, so what happened? So there was a lot of pressure, and they are working and this. And the other stream was with academia, because the biggest sexual harassment, the biggest rapes happen in the campus. And funny enough, there isn't very much, I can count it with one hand, how many women are the rectors or the #1 of universities around the world. And this was the worst of the schemes, because they couldn't come up with more professors coming up to the boards, etc. So this is the hardest to make sure that gender equality move the needle. But we have done a lot of manuals, a lot of guidelines, and there's always we can always share with you, and they are in the public domain, they are public goods, to tackle the sexual harassment in universities, and the due process as well, and the due process that protect the women, right? So this is what basically we do on a regular basis, and we do also other campaigns, but campaigns that we evaluate, and we can say, okay, this is something that have moved the needle. We monitor very closely and we evaluate.
Thank you so much for that very complete answer. So I have a question that I would like to ask all of the panelists. What each of the countries or in your institutions are you doing to stop the brain drain of women?
Are you asking me?
I'm gonna ask Silvia and then Cláudia.
Okay.
I think when I was listening to Cláudia's presentation and thinking that she was mentioning that there was a very adverse environment for scientists and for encouraging young people to take an academic career, because there's, for example, labor stability that used to be something in the academic sector. Now it's not so certain. So I think that in general, for men and women, we are not doing much. No, we are not doing much. Right, I mentioned that I'm right now in Colombia. I'm at the border with Venezuela, and I have been very impressed because I found many professors from universities in Venezuela was doing any kind of job to make a living, not because the university setting was affected by the crisis. And that sort of told me, I mean, I was very shocked, because one tends to think that universities are very strong institutions, that universities survived economic, political crisis. Now we have Universidad de Salamanca, which is 800 years old, and we tend to think that we are strong institutions. And then you found that in general, we are living in Latin America a context which is being very adverse for the academic careers of young people in general. And I think that's something that needs to worry us a lot. But I do think that is in general, it's both for men and women. But I do think that in the case of Mexico, it's not only a brain drain in terms of women leaving the country, but also a brain loss in terms of women that would potentially develop in the academic sector, in tertiary educations, in universities, and are not entering. And I think that one of the reasons is, for example, in Mexico, we are still lagging behind in terms of specific policies to balance family life and academic trajectories. In terms of having something that the US has had for a long time, such as a maternity clock. Most of the Mexican universities do not have a maternity clock, no? And I think that we can be more assertive in finding this balance in order to create a more equal environment for women who decide to go into the academic trajectory and attract women into the academic trajectories.
Thank you so much for that answer. Cláudia, would you like to say, and also maybe you can talk to us about how Brazil is attracting more women to the universities?
Well, Brazil is attracting some women to the university, but if we want to stop the brain drain, I mentioned a little bit something about it in my own presentation. It's important to have strong democratic institutions and a climate of opportunities. people are leaving universities in our country, and then I'm going to comment on something that Silvia mentioned. But people are leaving university to go abroad because they are fed up with persecution, with censure, with lack of financial support for projects and scholarships. So research is not valued. When science and technology is not valued in a country, young people, bright and talented young people will leave. But I think that Silvia mentioned another side of the coin, which is the fact that there is talent, even among those that are excluded from university and could find in university opportunities to flourish. And as Vaeza has mentioned, many women do not go into university, or even if they go, they don't take additional work within the university administration, because they are overburdened already with care of for the elders or for young children. That is not evenly distributed in a couple, let's say, in a typical couple. So we have loss of talent, loss of the talents that don't get into the university, and that even if they get into university, they don't build a career there because they have families, scores, and difficulties that they have to face in trying to establish a life balance, a work-life balance.
Thank you very much, Cláudia. For now, I think we have reached the time for our panel today, and I would like to continue this discussion with you. I think it has been really interesting to hear your point of view, and we have a lot of work together ahead to create more opportunities for women advancement, and certainly to stop sexual harassment. I think, thank you so much. We learned, I really hope we can share another panel soon.
Okay. So,
thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, and to the audience as well for being here.